This presentation is entitled Teófilo Rego's Oporto, Modern Architecture and City Readings through Photographic Postcards, and will address an ongoing collaborative research project that focuses on the analysis of the relationship between photography and architecture, held between Centro de Estudos Arnaldo Araújo, da Escola Superior Artística do Porto, a Portuguese University Research and Development Unit, and the Casa da Imagem da Fundação Manuel Leão, a Portuguese non-profit and public interest institution. The purpose of this research project is to select, describe, digitize, store, and make public a selection of approximately 5,000 images of the archive of the photographer Teófilo Rego, born in 1914 and deceased in 1993, that profusely documented Oporto and the northern region of Portugal during the last 5 decades of its life. At total, the Teófilo Rego Photographic Archive has approximately 600,000 photographs stored in 3,115 original boxes, dating from the 1940s to the 1990s, being the research itself centered in the analysis of the emergence of modern architecture in Portugal and aiming to better understand the national culture and society at the decades when Portugal was under the fascist political regime that ruled it for an uninterrupted period of 41 years. The commercial photography section is, in keeping with other Portuguese photographic studios of the time, organized by client, each box corresponding to one client and ordered alphabetically. The majority of the archive, around 92%, consists of commercial work in contrast to other studios at the beginning of the century, which dealt predominantly with portraits. Particularly, the images shown to be the scope of this paper, a series of photographic postcards representative of the north of Portugal and its architectures, were taken in response to a commission made to the photographer in the 1960s by a private publisher for the production of a series of postcards. But before addressing these particular images, and in order to fully develop both the contextualization and critical reading of this part of the Teófilo Rego archive, first, it will be necessary to approach the Portuguese history of photographic postcards itself. Since its very early history, photography has selected architecture as one of its main themes. Over the past 2 centuries, too often, the first encounter with a building or constructed environment comes from looking at an image, usually a photograph. However, despite its importance, the study of architectural photography is generally underestimated. Particularly from the mid-19th century until a few decades ago, often these visual representations of the urban built environment would be images that would be disseminated and perpetuated mostly by a particular expression of the photographic image, the postcard. The earliest postcards in Europe date from 1840s and were hand-painted directly on cards. The first commercially produced postcards with decorated borders just appeared in the 1860s, and lithographed printed ones, usually with drawings or advertising images, appeared in the following decade in the 1870s. In Portugal, if the appearance of photography and the acceptance of photographic invention was almost instantaneous, being known the existence of daguerreotypes since 1840, the introduction of the illustrated postcard would happen, on the other hand, a little bit later than in other European countries, being the first known examples just from 1895 onwards. At the turn of the 20th century, the social acceptance of photography and its gradual dissemination transformed it in an indispensable means of communication and ensured its success at very different contexts, like publication, institutional and political portraits, carte de visite, photojournalism, and of course, the photographic postcard, in which the theme of the representation of Portuguese cities and their remarkable architectures will be the object of particular attention. And if studies about the history of photography were relatively recent in Portugal, as until 1980 the research in this area is relatively sparse, being the only exception Augusto da Silva Carvalho's first study on Portuguese photography published in 1940. Less recent and less extensive are, of course, studies on the photographic postcard, being only known the series of postcards produced in the major Portuguese cities, as in Oporto, mostly for photography studios like Casa Biel or Fotografia Guedes, or small publishers such as typographers, department stores, newsagents, or tobacconists, like Ada Canedo, Araújo e Sobrinho, or Tabacaria Alberto Ferreira, all of them also in Oporto. Particularly, this presentation will focus on a specific collection of illustrated postcards, the one produced in 1960s by Teófilo Rego for the Centro de Caridade da Nossa Senhora do Perpétuo Socorro. The Centro de Caridade da Nossa Senhora do Perpétuo Socorro, created in 1958 by the Reverend Marinho Azpetsguia e Cia, would order this photographer Images to produce a series of postcards through its own publishing house called Promoção, and was centered on two main themes: religious tourism, whose interest is mostly ethnographic, and of course architectural photography, dedicated not only to historical buildings and places, but also to a particular period of the history of Portuguese modernist architecture, the specific context of the Escola de Porto, by itself a rather unusual subject for a postcard collection. So, in this series of postcards devoted to modernist architecture in the northern Portugal, we will find by contrast a selection of photographers which characterize the profile of this period of the history of Portuguese architecture, associated both with an architectural production guided to fulfill the needs of a fascist political regime, and an ideological agenda dictated by the international influence, mainly French, in the Portuguese modernist architecture. In these images, as in many others that also belong to this photographic archive, we'll find one of the most comprehensive portrayals of modern architecture in Portugal, bringing together a series of photographs of the works of two generations of architects, central figures of the international recognized architecture school, Escola de Porto, that literally means School of Oporto, whose work we'll find gathered in this archive. The particular interest of these postcards is therefore not only its specific theme, but also the odd choice of putting them together with all the other usual subjects present in this kind of collections, such as historic heritage sites or religious buildings and events. And adding to this, there is also an increased interest in this particular section as it contains a series of unpublished images of both built and unbuilt architectural projects, some of them reference works of Portuguese modernism. To end, it's also important to say that despite the interest that this series of postcards may have, naturally, the most significant part of the architectural photography samples in Teófilo Rego's archive are in the form of negative films and plates. And therefore, to illustrate the richness of this archive, we'll also show in this presentation some demonstrative examples of negative-based images to have an overall idea of the collection. However, in contrast to the archives of other Portuguese photographic studios, the Teófilo Rego Archive possesses very little written documentation to support the images, being that the reason why the images shown in this presentation appear without any reference of title or date, as this identification is the work that is precisely being done at the time by the investigators. As already stated, this research project aims to restore and make available a part of this archive, and is currently in the process of selecting approximately 5,000 images for the creation of a digital archive on this topic. The time period which the selection will cover is stipulated as being between 1940, an important date in Portuguese modernism, as it is the opening year of the exhibition of the Portuguese world, also coinciding with Teófilo Rego's embarking on independent photography activity, and 1961, year of the publication of the book Arquitetura Popular em Portugal, meaning Vernacular Architecture in Portugal, by the Sindicato Nacional dos Arquitetos, or National Union of Architects, which arose as a result of a government survey that had taken place on rural housing. And despite the aim of this project is mainly to study the work of the modernist architects for whom Teófilo Rego carried out photographic work, in addition to these photographs, there are also several works of photomontage, probably produced at the request of the architects for a specific purpose. Therefore, in addition to the study of photography of modern architecture, This project will also encompass the art of photography in Portugal between 1940 and 1960, looking at the techniques in use, photographic montage, or the types of commission involved. It is a fact that in the time period in question, the diffusion of both national and international architecture coincided with the expansion of photography in terms of its democratization and instrumentalization, as images are progressively used as a way to achieve a particular result in the communication process, especially in architectural competitions, specialized publications, and exhibitions. So, it is hoped with this project, in addition to the analysis of architectural design and its images influence each other, or how editing and producing photographic images become tools of communication and design, also to understand how the photographers were used. That is to say, if the purpose was strictly professional, if they were used to build a personal archive, or whether they were produced for exhibitions or for inclusion in catalogs or publications. Being important, for each of these cases, to determine to what extent the photographer remained anonymous, while the images highlighted the author of the photographed object, the architect, demonstrating precisely how, from the beginning of modern architecture, photography came to provide an essential tool in the conception, dissemination, and promotion of architectural design, as well as an indispensable tool in the communication of its ideas and theories.